This story starts with NCT 127. NCT is a unit-based experimental K-pop group debuted by SM Entertainment. I will not be explaining their concept here because people that are not acquainted with NCT get very confused. Just know that there's 21 members. I know all their names. Do you? Probably not. You probably touch grass sometimes. Anyways, I was listening to one of the units of NCT called NCT 127. Their newest title track is called Favorite, and it's marginally better than their previous title track, Sticker, which was an abomination. I'm gonna come right out and say it. Sticker was an abomination and should never have been released. With that hot take out of the way. And Favorite was marginally better. I have some qualms with it. For instance, the verses don't mesh well with the chorus, and the chorus is fantastic, but the verses kind of take the song down a little bit because they simply do not flow well, which is an SM Entertainment style right now that I'm not too fond of, but you know, at least it's K-pop. It sounds like K-pop, whether I think it's good K-pop or not. At least it doesn't sound like a Western song in Korean. Anyways, I am getting off track. One of my qualms with the title track Favorite from NCT 127 was not just the chorus and verses that didn't mesh well, in my opinion. The other issue I had with it was the absolutely cringe lyrics. Now, I don't understand Korean, and while I would like to learn Korean, that would be lovely, I do quite enjoy not being able to understand the lyrics, so I don't have to understand the cringe shit that's being said. However, throughout the years and since Blackpink's and BTS's international success, I had a theory that English in K-pop had skyrocketed. There were English lyrics in NCT 127's Favorite, and dear fucking God, were they cringe. Specifically, this line rapped by Johnny. Just watching you never satisfy my soul. That was fucking awful. Hey, small tiny rant. SM Entertainment, please stop making acceptable vocals rap. I'm fucking begging you. Stop putting unnecessary rap in your song, especially considering you're not known to be a rap entertainment. That's not your shtick. You're a vocal entertainment. That's what we know you for. And your vocals are fucking fantastic, so utilize them. Stop putting cringe rap parts in these songs and making subpar rappers do those rap parts. Just let Johnny be a vocal. That's all I'm asking. Let Johnny do vocals. He is acceptable. He's an acceptable vocal. He is not a rapper. Stop making him rap. Rant's over. I could make a whole video ranting about that. It gets on my nerves. But anyways, that aside, that got me thinking. That exact line got me thinking. We can guess how much English has increased in K-pop over the past, 15 years. But do we have the numbers? Can we quantify this in some way, shape, or form? And I've been meaning to do this for a long time, actually, because I've noticed this becoming an issue, I guess we'd call it, for about 2 years now, at the very least. If not longer, of course. I mean, there was a bit of increase in English usage in the middle 2010s, but it's become a much bigger issue lately. So that's exactly what I set out to do. I set out on a mission to quantify the English increase in K-pop over the past 15 years. Nick, why the fuck did you do this? For fun. Yes, I did math for fun. What are you going to do about it? Cry? So throughout this whole week, while I was having a mental breakdown over my 94 hours of work in the past 2 weeks, I decided to fixate on figuring out the numbers, the numeric increase in English lyrics in K-pop. How did I do this? There's only a couple ways that you can, quantify this. And I felt that one way was better and had less flaws than the others. There were two main ways that I thought I could go about this. One, I could listen to every song that I've decided and have a stopwatch and start and stop when English lyrics came on the screen. The second way I could do it is go through and count the English lyrics, the English words, if you will, and then count the Korean words and then find a percentage from that. Now, my issue with the second way is that language is fucking weird. In English, we have lots of unnecessary little words like to and the. These words don't really exist in Korean and will automatically make the percentage of English go up higher because of those tiny words like to and the. And in Korean even, they won't have those separate words. They'll just add it on to one big conglomerate word. So for instance, in Korean, if you wanted to say I also, that's two words in English. However, in Korean, you can make that one word. Na is I, but if you wanted to say I also, you could say 나도, and that's one word, but it's just one word with a particle added onto it to make a conglomerate word. So what I'm saying is, Korean and English are too different to do that second way. So I did it the first way. Are there ways I could fuck up the first way? For sure. There is human error we need to take into account here, and these numbers are not going to be exact, but I'm not looking for exact. I'm looking for, like, what is the biggest difference? Like, I'm looking for big differences. So even if I was a second off, doing the stopwatch method, that's not going to fuck with the percentage point too much. That's not going to fuck with any of the patterns too much. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm just looking for patterns. What are the patterns in English usage in K-pop over the past 15 years? Oh boy, do I have data. So I had to get a good sample, but I couldn't overwhelm myself. And that was kind of the biggest issue, is that I wanted to keep going. I wanted to keep doing more and more songs, more and more groups, but I needed to cut myself off at some point. One of the things that I took into account when choosing groups and companies, I needed second generation groups. I needed groups that had songs from 2005 to 2010. So that leaves us with, most of the time, the big three: JYP, SM, and YG. I also decided to do one company that wasn't in the big three, just to see if, maybe the big three might have different data from a company that's not necessarily small, but not necessarily the big three either. So I also chose F&C Entertainment. Now, the problem with F&C Entertainment is that they don't have any, I suppose I could have done one of their K-rock bands, but with K-pop, they really only have early third gen for me to work with and not really much second gen for me to work with. So I did only, do like 2010 to 2021 with F&C Entertainment. But to be fair, it was just to, compare. It was just to compare with the big three to see, if the big three might be different from a company like F&C, which isn't necessarily a small company, but which isn't the big three either, So having chose my companies to work with, which would be YG, SM, JYP, and F&C Entertainment, I then needed to choose the groups that I needed to work with. I split up boy groups and girl groups because I wanted to see if there was a difference in English usage between boy groups and girl groups. So I chose 3 generations, or 3 different time periods of boy groups and girl groups from each of these companies. Now, I will say I'm not doing generations in a K-poppy kind of way where they think that, ITZY is 4th generation, TWICE is 3rd generation, and Wonder Girls is 2nd generation K-pop. I'm doing generation as in, this is the older brother group of this group. Because I did, for instance, 2PM, GOT7, and Stray Kids from JYP. Stray Kids is technically 3rd generation because they debuted in 2017, ? Now, I will say they are late 3rd generation, but they are still 3rd generation in my opinion. GOT7 is early 3rd generation, and 2PM is late 2nd gen. So I just kind of did it by older brother group, middle brother group, youngest brother group. Same thing with girl groups. So I've already said my JYP boy groups. For my JYP girl groups, I did Wonder Girls, TWICE, and ITZY. For my SM boy groups, I did Super Junior, EXO, and NCT 127. For my SM Entertainment girl groups, I did Girls' Generation, Red Velvet, and aespa. For my YG boy groups, I did Big Bang, Winner, and iKON. For my YG girl groups, they only have really 2 notable girl groups in YG, so that there's a bit of a difference there already between YG and some of the other big 3 companies, which that's foreshadowing. I guess I could have done T-Wist, but they only existed for like 2 years because YG is a manipulative skank. That's besides the point. But anyways, I only did 2NE1 and Blackpink. For FNC, I did SF9 and P1 Harmony for the boy groups. For girl groups, I did AOA and Cherry Bullet. Once again, like I said, FNC doesn't really have much second generation going on, so it is going to be only 2 groups. But it served its purpose. Now that we've established the groups, for each group, I chose 3 songs. And choosing the songs, I went with debut, most recent song, and song directly in the middle. For the song directly in the middle, I tried not to, put my own opinion into it. I literally counted the amount of title tracks, and then I divided that into 2, and then I counted the amount of that division to get that middle title track. So, for instance, 2PM, their debut song was in 2008, and their most recent song was in 2021. So I chose a song from 2015 that they released as a song directly in the middle of their career. I did this for every group so long as they had 3 songs. In fact, the only 2 groups that I did not do 3 songs for was aespa and P1 Harmony. P1 Harmony does not have more than 2 title tracks. aespa Next Level came out the same year Savage came out. So it didn't make any sense for me to give another 2021 stat for the same group. So I just cut it altogether and just have a 2020 and a 2021 metric for aespa. So as I stated before, I did the stopwatch method. I would watch the lyric videos of these songs. Is some of this data at the mercy of the translators? Yes, I will say that. There's room for mistakes. There's room for mistakes on my part too. But I did try to establish some rules for myself while I was doing this half asleep and exhausted. Rule number 1, ad-libs that are vowels, for instance, I did not count as English. So for instance, if the ad-lib is, what is love, for instance, I would count that. But if the ad-lib is or or oh, I did not count that. That's not English necessarily. Those are sounds. Those are sounds and they can't exist in Korean. I did, however, count the word yeah. I counted the word yeah because that is straight up an English word. And while it can't be used as a sound filler, it's still an English word. Did that probably boost some of the English time because of, high notes where they sing yeah? Definitely. I'm not going to say that's not the truth, but it's still an English word and it did take up time in songs. 3, I didn't count English words that have been Hangulized. To explain, there are English words that have been, integrated into Korean. For instance, if you went up to a Korean person and said coffee, they may not know what the fuck you're saying. However, if you say kopi, they will understand what you're saying. Kopi is a Hangulized version of the English word coffee, and it might as well just be a Korean word at this point, because there's Hangul writing for it, and they simply will not recognize the word if you say it in English. So I did not count words that the translators decided were Hangulized versions of English words. 4, I did count silly little English phrases, like bada bing, bada boom. Is that a traditional English phrase? No, but it's English slang. And I consider that English. I mean, it doesn't exist in Korean. I know it sounds like a weird onomatopoeia or whatever, but it is an English phrase that means, finished, done that. I did count stuff like that. Those were my rules I had going into it. I also counted certain ad-libs, like I said, that had English in it, like "What is love?" And there was really nothing much I could do about English phrases that overlapped with each other, because mind you, we're dealing with groups that have 5 to 21 members, so they will be singing over each other sometimes. There's nothing much I could do about that. This is just about the percentage of time that English takes up K-pop songs. That's what I settled on, at least. So, after all this fucking explanation, here's the results. So here is the master scatter plot. When I showed this to my friend, she had a small nervous breakdown because of how messy this scatter plot is. And I went, calm down. I'm going to split it up into groups. Stop having a nervous breakdown about my scatter plot. And yeah, it looks messy as hell because there's fucking 14 groups on this scatter plot, each with 3 songs. So that's 42 dots on this scatter plot. So that's messy. I mean, you can kind of see an upward trend. Kind of. But it's kind of difficult to see with all these companies, all these groups just thrown onto a scatter plot. So I split it up, naturally. I found it best to split it up by entertainment first, just to see, what the different entertainments are doing. So when I showed my friend the scatter plot for JYP, she went, damn, that's clean. And I went, yeah, it is. There is an obvious increase in English usage in JYP. Are there some outliers? For sure. 2 p.m. Dropped. As you can see by the lone tiny dot in 2021 at the bottom. But as we will get into more later, 2 p.m. is not very much an international group, and JYP has no reason to try and market them to an international audience, especially because these 14-year-olds getting into K-pop tend to think 30-year-olds are on their deathbed. 2 p.m.'s a little too old for them, is what I'm saying. So it makes sense that they would have less English in their 2021 song, as it's just being marketed to possibly Japan or Korea. And that is a trend. That's a trend for sure. And we're actually going to get into that with YG Entertainment right now. YG Entertainment thinks it's special because, holy shit, there is no trend. It's more of a downward trend, if anything. And the reason for that is certainly not Blackpink. It's not Blackpink. Blackpink was the only group that had an upward trend. I will say Big Bang had an upward trend as well, but you know the difference between Big Bang, Blackpink, and the other groups in YG? The other groups in YG are less international. Big Bang and Blackpink had more of an international appeal, and YG is really pushing the Blackpink agenda in the West especially. So it makes sense that Blackpink would have all of the English lyrics on their shoulders. Now, as for 2NE1, I think 2NE1 had some international appeal, but it got lost as, their hiatus went on and as the group slowly fell apart. Now, Winner and iKON have Korean appeal, Korean and Japanese appeal, I should say. They don't have much international appeal. In the words of my friend, I have never met an iKON stan in real life. So there's less international iKON and Winner stans, and therefore they would have the least amount of English lyrics of all of the groups that I did this for. iKON alone was insane to me. 2 of the songs had 0% English, not one English word in their song. That should be taken into account. Are these groups being pushed internationally, or are they being marketed as Korean groups for Koreans? And YG is the biggest outlier of all of the companies that I looked at for this exact reason, I believe. SM Entertainment's scatterplot is also fairly clean, as it shows an upward trend in English, as I hypothesized. There's a few outliers here and there, but it does generally show an upwards trend. FNC also shows an upwards trend. However, I would like to note immediately the stark difference between their girl groups and their boy groups. And we're going to get into this more later, as it's part of my analysis for sure, hence why I split them up in the first place. But you can straight up circle all the dots in the girl groups and all the dots of the boy groups, and they are completely separate. Interesting. Do these companies think girl groups are less marketable internationally than boy groups? The answer's yes, for sure. A few outliers here and there, like Luna, but less marketable to the West, says these companies. The West and international, I do distinguish the two, just because English is an international language, but there is a get into the Western market agenda. So I do distinguish these two phrases. I might seem like I'm using them interchangeably. I'm not. It's kind of difficult to tell if this is an international agenda or a get into the Western market agenda. I think the more English that's being used now is a get into the Western market agenda as established by the BTS and Blackpink success. Now, when you put the girl group versus the boy group scatter plot side by side, you'll see exactly what I mean. There is an upward trend for both of them, but girl groups seem like it's not as much. There is an upward trend for some, for sure. But for others, it seemed like there was a dip, as in these companies probably gave up on their international appeal and decided to go with the Korean fan base that they've already established. It's a little less likely for this to happen with boy groups, although iKON and Winner are a huge outlier. Some of the older boy groups did the same thing as girl groups in that regard, to which these companies kind of gave up on their international appeal and decided to hone in on their Korean appeal. Scatter plots are nice to look at, but I want some averages. So I went through and got some averages. First average that I did, I went through all girl groups and then all boy groups between a certain time period and went through and did it for a normal amount of time intervals, I guess. So for instance, 2005 to 2009, I found an average. 2010 to 2015, I found an average. 2016 to 2021, I found an average. And yes, I did separate boy groups and girl groups, and just to hammer in my point about how these companies seem to think boy groups are more marketable internationally, especially in the West. There is a stark difference between boy groups and girl groups between 2005 and 2009, a 5% difference in English usage. Girl groups were a low 7%, and boy groups were a normal 12%. From 2010 to 2015, the gap closed a little bit, which I find interesting. They upped girl groups' English a lot and closed the gap. However, boy groups still have a 2% leverage over girl groups in the amount of English in their songs. Girl groups at 13% and boy groups at 15%. From 2016 to 2021, there is the same difference between girl groups and boy groups, a difference of 2%. Boy groups at 20%, girl groups at 18%. So boy groups from 2005 to 2021 had an 8% increase in English usage in their songs. For girl groups, it was 11%. Now, was it because girl groups started so low that the number is so high? Yes, girl groups started much, much lower than boy groups in this regard, and that's why they had a higher increase in English. Yet despite their higher increase in English, they still remain lower than boy groups. Because mind you, between 2010 and 2021, both boy groups and girl groups had the same increase in English. Not one or the other went higher. It was both 5% increase in the past 11 years. Now let's look at the breakdown between companies. YG Entertainment thinks it's special. YG Entertainment thinks it's unique. YG Entertainment did a parabola, or a vector, we could say. Between 2006 and 2009, YG was at a 15%, which is pretty high for that time period. In fact, it's the highest for that time period of all the companies, which is interesting. I blame Big Bang for that. YG then dipped 5% between 2010 and 2015, which is super interesting because 2014 and 2015 were iKON and Winner's debut years, and they both had a whopping 4% for their debut. Because of Blackpink's debut in 2016 and their activities all the way to 2021, that 5% was regained. JYP Entertainment had a pretty normal English growth from 2006 to 2015, but for some reason it stagnates and goes up only 2% between 2016 and 2021. SM Entertainment is the poster child for regular English growth. From 2006 to 2015, SM Entertainment went from 7% to 16%, a whopping 9% growth. But in the next 5 years, SM Entertainment goes up 10% to a whopping 26%. I do, in fact, attribute this to NCT 127. FNC Entertainment was very interesting, especially considering I only had 2 generations to work with. Between 2010 and 2021, FNC's English usage went up 13%. But what happened in 2016? SF9 debuted, and SF9 has some of the highest averages of English in their songs that I've seen from a lot of the groups. In fact, they even rival NCT 127. And P1 Harmony is set to have the same thing happen. P1 Harmony right now is mirroring SF9 in their English usage. And who did FNC have before the debut of SF9? AOA. AOA, the girl group, who only had 1% of English in their song Heart Attack. Now, I will say, I did not know what to do for their debut song Elvis. I didn't know whether or not to count the name Elvis or not, and whether or not to count names in general. Because Elvis is a name. It's not English. It's a name. And in fact, it's their fandom name, which is for Korea. So I will say, I took 2 stopwatch times for AOA's debut song Elvis, and the word Elvis is a whopping 11% of the song. 11% of the song is just AOA singing Elvis. I decided not to count it because it's their fandom name, and I would not count fandom names personally because that seems like a Korean thing rather than an English thing. I mean, that's up to interpretation, of course. If you want to count AOA's 26% in 2012, you can do that. I'm going to put them at 15% with everything else. Regardless of their debut song, Heart Attack was at 1%. In fact, I actually rounded that up. It was actually at 0.5%, so it was even less. Why did you do this? I wanted to prove a point that K-pop is becoming more westernized, and if it's not becoming more westernized, it's becoming more international. Anyways, yes, I did do math for my enjoyment. Yes, I am satisfied. This was very interesting, and I hope you found it interesting too, despite me droning on and on about numbers. I found this fascinating.